World War II was the deadliest conflict in human history, a war that left scars on every continent and changed the course of the 20th century. The devastation was unprecedented, cities reduced to rubble, entire populations uprooted, and millions of lives lost. The echoes of this conflict still shape our world today, reminding us of the terrible cost of global war. The war reshaped nations and lives across the globe, forcing millions to flee their homes and forever altering the political landscape. Borders were redrawn, empires crumbled, and new powers emerged from the ashes. For ordinary people, the war meant separation from loved ones, hunger, and the constant fear of violence. The roots of this global catastrophe lay in the aftermath of World War I. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, was meant to secure peace, but instead, it left Germany humiliated, burdened with heavy reparations, and seething with resentment. Many Germans felt betrayed and blamed for a war they believed was not solely their fault. Economic collapse soon followed. The Great Depression of the 1930s plunged millions into poverty and despair, not just in Germany but across Europe. In this climate of uncertainty, extremist leaders like Mussolini in Italy and Hitler in Germany found fertile ground for their radical ideas, promising hope and revival to desperate populations. In Germany, Hitler's Nazi Party rose to power by vowing to restore national pride and reclaim lost territories. Through fiery speeches and relentless propaganda, Hitler convinced many that only he could return Germany to greatness, exploiting the anger and frustration that simmered after World War I. Meanwhile, in Japan, military leaders sought to expand their empire, believing that new territories were essential for securing resources and national survival. Their ambitions led to invasions in Asia, setting the stage for further conflict. Nationalism and militarism swept through Germany, Italy, and Japan. These ideologies fueled aggressive expansion and intolerance as leaders rallied their people around dreams of restored glory and power. The world watched anxiously as these nations grew bolder. By the late 1930s, the world stood on the brink. Aggressive ambitions in Europe and Asia threatened to ignite another catastrophic war. Headlines warned of looming conflict, and anxious crowds gathered in cities, hoping for peace but fearing the worst. The shadow of World War I loomed large over a generation that had already suffered so much. Yet the coming storm would prove even more devastating, unleashing destruction on a scale the world had never seen before. The 1930s saw Germany, Italy, and Japan push boundaries with little resistance. Hitler rebuilt Germany's military, occupied the Rhineland, and annexed Austria, while Britain and France clung to appeasement. The Munich Conference handed Hitler the Sudetenland, but his ambitions only grew. Meanwhile, Japan invaded Manchuria and China, defying the powerless League of Nations. In 1939, Hitler and Stalin shocked the world with a non-aggression pact, secretly planning to divide Poland. On September 1st, Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France declared war 2 days later. World War II had begun. The world's hopes for peace had collapsed. Aggression had gone unchecked for too long. The stage was set for a global conflict. Germany's blitzkrieg crushed Poland in weeks, then swept through Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and France. The British army barely escaped at Dunkirk, leaving Europe under Nazi control. Italy joined the war, and France fell, split between occupation and the puppet Vichy regime. Britain stood alone, bracing for invasion. In Asia, Japan seized French Indochina, alarming the United States. The US responded with economic sanctions, pushing Japan closer to confrontation. The Axis powers seemed unstoppable, dominating Europe and Asia. The world watched as democracy teetered on the edge. The next moves would decide the fate of nations. In the summer of 1940, Hitler unleashed the full might of the German Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain, determined to crush the Royal Air Force and pave the way for an invasion of England. The skies above Britain became a deadly battleground as Spitfires and Hurricanes clashed with waves of enemy bombers and fighters. Night after night, London and other cities endured the relentless blitz, with bombs raining down on homes, factories, and historic landmarks. Yet, in the face of devastation, British pilots and civilians alike refused to yield. Their courage and resilience handed Hitler his first major defeat, forcing him to abandon his plans for invasion. Frustrated by failure in the West, Hitler turned his ambitions eastward. In June 1941, he launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in history, sending millions of German troops across the Soviet border in a bid to conquer Russia and seize its vast resources. The initial German advance was swift and brutal, capturing vast territories and encircling entire Soviet armies. But as winter set in, the tide began to turn. The bitter cold, fierce Soviet resistance and stretched supply lines brought the German war machine to a grinding halt outside Moscow. Meanwhile, across the globe, Japan, facing crippling US embargoes and hungry for resources, launched a surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The world watched in shock as flames and smoke engulfed the Pacific Fleet. The attack galvanized the United States. President Roosevelt addressed Congress, calling December 7 a date which will live in infamy. America, once divided over entering the war, now united in resolve, began a massive mobilization of its military and industry. In response, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, binding the fates of Europe, Asia, and America together. The conflict had become truly global, with battle lines drawn across continents and oceans. From the bombed-out cities of Europe to the jungles of the Pacific, the world was now engulfed in flames. No corner of the globe was untouched by the devastation and chaos of war. The Allies faced their darkest hour, with enemy forces advancing on all fronts and the future of freedom hanging in the balance. Yet, hope endured in the hearts of those who refused to surrender. As the world braced for even greater conflict, the seeds of resistance and determination were taking root. The tide of war would soon begin to turn, setting the stage for a new chapter in the struggle for victory. By 1942, the Axis powers were at their peak, but cracks began to show. At Midway, U.S. codebreakers ambushed the Japanese fleet, sinking 4 carriers and shifting the balance in the Pacific. In North Africa, British forces defeated Rommel at El Alamein, while Allied landings in Morocco and Algeria trapped Axis troops. On the Eastern Front, the Battle of Stalingrad raged. Soviet forces encircled and destroyed the German Sixth Army, marking a turning point in Europe. The Axis war machine was now on the defensive. Allied victory signaled hope for liberation. The long road to victory had begun. The Allies were gaining strength. The momentum was shifting. With momentum on their side, the Allies launched offensives on every front. The US, Britain, and the Soviet Union coordinated strategy, demanding unconditional Axis surrender. Allied forces invaded Sicily and Italy, toppling Mussolini, though German resistance slowed their advance. On the Eastern Front, the Soviets pushed west, winning the massive tank battle at Kursk and driving toward Germany. In the Pacific, US forces began island hopping, bypassing strongholds and moving closer to Japan. Each victory brought the Allies nearer to the enemy's heartland. The war's end was in sight, but fierce battles still lay ahead. The Allies pressed forward on all fronts. The final phase was approaching. In 1944, the Allies prepared for the decisive blow, the long-awaited invasion of France. On D-Day, June 6, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, overcoming fierce German resistance in a historic assault. Within weeks, they broke out of Normandy and triumphantly liberated Paris, sparking hope across Europe. By autumn, most of France and Belgium were free, and Allied armies pressed forward toward Germany's borders. Hitler's last gamble, the Battle of the Bulge, failed after weeks of brutal winter fighting in the Ardennes. The German army was exhausted, battered, and in full retreat. The Allies closed in from the west, while the Soviets advanced relentlessly from the east. Nazi Germany's defeat was now inevitable as their cities lay in ruins. The liberation of Europe was nearly complete, bringing freedom to millions. The end of the war was finally near, and hope returned to a devastated continent. In early 1945, Allied forces launched a final, relentless push into Germany from both the east and the west. American, British, and French troops advanced across the Rhine, while the Soviet Red Army pressed in from the east, liberating city after city as they closed the noose around Hitler's crumbling regime. The German military, exhausted and outnumbered, could do little to stop the overwhelming tide. The devastation of years of war was visible everywhere: shattered towns, fleeing civilians, and desperate last stands by German defenders. Deep beneath the ruined streets of Berlin, Adolf Hitler, isolated and facing inevitable defeat, took his own life as Soviet troops closed in on the city. The once mighty Nazi leadership collapsed, and Berlin fell after brutal street fighting. The city, reduced to rubble, became a symbol of the war's destructive power and the downfall of tyranny. In May 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, was met with jubilation across the world. Crowds filled the streets of London, Paris, New York, and countless other cities, celebrating the end of years of bloodshed and sacrifice. For millions, it was a moment of relief, hope, and remembrance for those who had been lost. Yet the war was not over. In the Pacific, American forces faced fierce resistance on islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa. These brutal battles, marked by extraordinary courage and staggering casualties on both sides, foreshadowed the unimaginable cost of a potential invasion of Japan's home islands. The fighting revealed the determination of Japanese defenders and the immense challenges that lay ahead. Confronted with the prospect of even greater loss of life, President Truman made the fateful decision to use a new and terrifying weapon, the atomic bomb. In August 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, unleashing destruction on a scale the world had never seen. The bombing shocked the world and demonstrated the devastating power of nuclear weapons. The overwhelming devastation forced Japan to surrender. On September 2, 1945, Japanese officials signed the formal surrender aboard the USS Missouri, bringing World War II to a close. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief, but the scars of war would linger for generations. As the Allies liberated Europe, the full horror of the Holocaust was revealed. Survivors emerged from concentration camps, bearing witness to unimaginable suffering and loss. The world was confronted with the depths of human cruelty, and the ruins of cities across Europe stood as stark reminders of the war's catastrophic toll. Determined to prevent such tragedy from ever happening again, nations came together in San Francisco to establish the United Nations. The UN was founded on the hope of fostering international cooperation, promoting peace, and protecting human rights. It marked a new era in global diplomacy and collective security. The end of the war also signaled the decline of European empires. Colonized nations began to demand independence, sparking a wave of decolonization across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Meanwhile, the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as rival superpowers, setting the stage for the Cold War, a new era of tension, competition, and ideological conflict that would shape the second half of the 20th century. The lessons of World War II remain vital to this day. The world learned the dangers of unchecked tyranny, the necessity of international cooperation, and the immense cost of war. The Nuremberg trials sought justice for war crimes, establishing principles that continue to influence international law and human rights. The legacy of World War II endures in our rebuilt cities, our international institutions, and our collective memory. Its impact still shapes our world today, reminding us of the importance of peace, justice, and the enduring hope for a better future.